I just wanted to note before I started talking about this that it's actually this model that we're developing, in the process of developing and thinking about, is actually based a lot on the work of other people, and I'm presenting it. So the deficiencies in my presentation should reflect on the other people who have done a lot of work on this. I've had a fourth year student, Lucy Cavalli, who looked at this question, developing a bioarchaeological model of health change in the Iron Age in the Upper Mun River Valley, and Charlotte King's has written a very lovely manuscript on this, drawing together a biosocial approach to start to conceptualise some of the changes that were happening in terms of the biology within the environmental context, and bring in ideas about paleoepidemiology, transmission rates, and etiologies of disease and stress. So the main aim of this talk is to really present this model, and as I said before, what we're starting to find is that with a lot of changes that are happening in the natural and cultural environment in the late Iron Age and the Upper Mun River Valley, we're also seeing health changes happening at this time. Now, a model incorporates multi-factorial as a multi-factorial approach, looking at human skeletal biology in the forefront, including isotopic analysis that's been done, paleopathology, looking at stress indicators and evidence of infectious disease, looking at demographic change that was happening, and dovetailing that with material cultural evidence we have of the changes that were happening during the Iron Age, geoarchaeological evidence and paleontological evidence and paleoclimatic evidence as well. So as many of you are aware, some of the socio-political changes which were that happen in other places of the world, for example in Europe and Near East and other places in the old world, weren't necessarily followed through in Southeast Asia. In those places, when we get the development of bronze working, we have a very fast shift to hierarchy. And in Southeast Asia, it's quite different with the introduction of metalworking. We still have what we see as community-based production and a hierarchical type of socio-political organisation. And it's not until the Iron Age that we actually see that there's evidence, people argue for evidence of a hierarchical based social organisation. Now, the general model of health change, the international applied model, persists that with agricultural development we have people starting to move into sedentary communities. As Mark just talked about, this doesn't necessarily always hold true in many places, but with the sedentary communities, we have an increase in transmission of infectious disease, lower unsanitary conditions, and also a reduction in nutrition food, leading to a deterioration in health. Now, a lot of the bioarchaeological work that's been done in Southeast Asia has actually shown that this doesn't necessarily hold true. So we have a problem in many parts of Thailand in that we don't have the pre-agricultural communities, don't have any of the pre-Neolithic communities, so we can't necessarily compare pre versus post-Neolithic, if you want to use those terms. I acknowledge that they're problematic. But what we're finding with the intensification of agriculture from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age, we're not necessarily finding any major deterioration in health at that time. So the model that we are developing is focused really on the Karat Plateau and the Upper Mun River Valley, and the Karat Plateau. And this is because this is where most of the targeted excavation and research projects have been carried out by Charles Hine in the Fine Arts Department. So really we have the opportunity to really look at trying to incorporate a lot of the archaeological evidence and the bioarchaeological evidence. So in terms of socio-political economic shifts in Southeast Asia prior to the Iron Age, some people would argue that the Neolithic really does correspond with a level of cultural change, and this is visible in sedentism, and I know that people have just said this doesn't happen, but it does in some areas. We do have evidence for new ceramic motifs and also items of material culture that are associated with the Neolithic. But we do have this retention of broad spectrum based diet. For example, at Moats, a lot of the diet there was based on non-agricultural food crops and also millet. And archaeologists had argued in this region that we have this retention of a very flexible social organisation, hierarchical organisation. And it wasn't until the Iron Age, really, in the Upper Mun River Valley that we see these marked changes in economic strategy and socio-political organisation. And we're starting to also see that there are some changes, some major changes potentially happening in terms of stress and infectious disease. Paleoclimatic evidence summarised by Wolfarth has shown that there was some changes in terms of the annual monsoon, faltering of that, which may have led during the middle of the Iron Age to there being less water available, and they argue that that gave impetus for water management, and that's shown by the development of moats and also the concurrent intensification of wet rice agriculture is shown in the isotopic evidence from King and others. There's also material cultural evidence of agricultural tools, including iron ploughshares and sickles, and also paleontological evidence for an increase in rice field weed species at this time, and zooarchaeological evidence for an increase in water species as well. And an argument for fixed social hierarchy, mainly based on inequalities of burial grave goods and also interpretations of a system that was required for the intensification of wet rice agriculture. We also have a proliferation of trade networks, including increasing numbers of trade items and a variety of goods, including exotic goods. Durgoto Rowley argues for uniform ceramic traditions coming to the fore at this time, which he argues is product of large-scale production at this time. Rice consumption's been argued to increase, as shown by the stable isotopic analysis, and rice also becomes symbolically important in some mortuary contexts, so that it's included within some graves. Now, we are hindered somewhat in looking at human skeletal biology in the Iron Age in the Upper Mun River Valley. We have some very, very poorly preserved burials. For example, Nonu Loke wasn't necessarily very well preserved, and most of the work that has been done on oral health. But we are starting to develop, a growing body of evidence that is revealing some major health changes and demographic changes as well. Recent work by me has looked at a comparative analysis of stress in infants and children from the Neolithic through to the Iron Age, and I find that there is an increase in non-specific health issues and also a major change in terms of demographics, in terms of infant death. And Tayles and Buckley have also found at Nonu Loke the first evidence for tuberculosis and leprosy as well, and they argue that that is happening as a result of increased contact at that time and the increased population sizes as well. Angela Clark's PhD thesis looked at physiological stress through looking at linear level hyperplasia and also stature. And she found that, while she didn't necessarily look at the Iron Age, because of problems with preservation at Wat. She did find that there was an increase in physiological stress in the females, as indicated with the linear animal hyperplasia and the stature. Oral health is also being used to look at health changes, and Stephanie Schrum has recently finished a large-scale investigation of oral health at Wat through the different time periods, and she found that there's higher rates of dental caries, tooth infections, and also alveolar resorption in the Iron Age. And also Jen Newton has found at some Cambodian sites, Pum Sophie and Pum Snai, that there was also an increase, also a high prevalence of dental caries and tooth infections there. We've also been doing some work looking at palaeodemography, and particularly focusing on infant and child mortality to look at population growth. And this is just showing you a slide of the mortality at Banumkar, which is a so-called Bronze Age site, and the Bronze Age period at Ban Wat here. And you can see that there is quite high infant mortality, but at Nonulok, an Iron Age site, in the late period of Ban Wat, which is dated to the Iron Age, we actually have this massive increase in infant death. And this is statistically significant, which would imply that there is a change happening in terms of fertility and population size. At the recent site of Non Bunjak that we're looking at, the preliminary information that we have from here is that the infant deaths are probably about 60%. They account for about 60% of the whole cemetery sample. So again, that's fitting with the pattern of changes in terms of demography in the Iron Age. So how do we explain this? How do we put the bioarchaeological information into the environmental context? There is evidence for large-scale deforestation in the area in the Iron Age. This is shown by the paleontological and phytolith evidence. And there's also, at the same time, as I said before, the increase in the digging of these large moats around the sites. This would have given a great environment for mosquitoes, a certain type of mosquito, Anopheles, to breed quite nicely. They like it. They like areas where there's a lot of water, a lot of stagnant water, and a lot of sunlight. So getting rid of the forests would have been very good for that. 5 minutes. It's also an environment which would have supported different types of parasitic worms and also protozoa. And these main worms, flukes as well, within the northeast high environment can cause some major issues with health, including causing schistosomiasis, liver cancer, dysentery, diarrhea as well. These standing water habitats are also very good for supporting some of the vectors of these worms and protozoa as well, including snails and fish, especially if you're eating these fish raw, which is done still quite often today. And the disease burden of things like malaria and worms and also protozoa would have been felt most severely on infants and children under 5 years of age. So this is probably what we're seeing in terms of this high infant mortality rate. And this is what's found at, as I showed before, the late period of Ban Wat and Nunulok and Non Bunjak. We've also got evidence at this time for holding animals together in one place. There's archaeological evidence that animals were held together at Bun on Wat, and these were located within the moats. This would have exacerbated fecal contamination and increased diarrheal disease and parasite transmission from bovids to humans. And it's also been shown in research that TB can actually jump from cattle to human populations. So having more domestic animals in contact with people at this time would have been conducive to the spread of infectious disease. With the development of intensive wet-rice agriculture, would have come also wealth disparities, and that's shown in the archaeological record mortuary analysis. When you have this entrenched social hierarchy, you have a social inequality, and this can lead to different access to resources and also care, and division of labour can also put some segments of the population at more risk than others. For example, these people working in the wet rice paddies would have had more contact, for example, with flukes and helminths and protozoa affecting their health, causing more social differentiation in terms of health. There's also good evidence for increase in population density, settlement sizes in the Iron Age, settlement density, and Heim has estimated that based on the amount of burials, that the size of the Iron Age, some of the Iron Age populations would have been from about 1,000 to 2,000 estimated. And when you've got an increased number of individuals at a site and you've got more contact between different sites, you also have the opportunity for infectious disease, novel infectious disease to be introduced, as well as infectious disease to be able to be maintained within those bigger populations. So to conclude, we're building up a better picture now of what's happening in terms of the Iron Age. What we think is happening is that there's a sharp shift in socio-political and environmental landscape, and this is really corresponding quite nicely with what we're finding in terms of the bioarchaeological evidence of health and stress in the palaeodemographic information. And what this work really is showing is that while we do this all the time, the actual value of dovetailing all these different evidences from, archaeology, geoarchaeology, and all the bioarchaeological evidence. And future work, I think, at a site of Non-Banjak in this region, which has beautifully preserved Iron Age skeletons, and it's also dated to the late Iron Age, will be very useful in us to be able to test this model further. Thank you.
Questions, Michelle? Were you too thorough in your presentation?
Were you too boring? Come on, Charlotte, you must have a question. Come on.
When is electricity kicking in Southeast Asia?
We've got evidence at Nunulok for potential leprosy and tuberculosis. So 500 AD.
But nothing before.
No, but I mean the preservation's not that good. I don't think we necessarily find it. Have you got any evidence? TB or?
Thanks for that. I was just wondering if you had any idea about what happens after the end of these Iron Age emergent sites. That will look like in terms of population health. My understanding is this area will obviously highlight continue to populate after this date. Some of the bigger sites that are on seven. Do you have any idea about how they use it? Because it's like the hours kind of.
Yeah, I think the new site that we're dealing with is at Non-Banjak, which is, you can walk from there from Bun on Wat, essentially as in the late Iron Age. So the sequence starts at the end of Nunulok, but after that, we don't have evidence for, getting to the historic period when people are starting to deal with their dead differently. So we can't necessarily test that, unfortunately. But it's my understanding is that's what's happened. And people would argue that everyone left those settlements and went to Angkor, but they didn't. Angkor had to be supported by the agricultural communities, but if you ask Charles Hyam, they all left.
We've run out of battery with this one, so I'll use this one and I'll hand it to you.
I'll get one more question in so we can stay roughly on.
Are we
This is
over?
very naive
Little bit.
question.
Sorry.
This is very naive question, but I would like to know, how do you decide whether a skeleton has a tuberculosis disease? Well, we usually know it from the lung or from the blood. What's the characteristic? Can you describe it for me?
Sure. There's many. It's a good question, because if people have tuberculosis, they don't necessarily always have to have any of the skeletal involvement, but there are certain types of pathology in the rib area, around where you've got your lungs, and also lytic lesions, so the bones being taken away in areas like the spine. So what we would do is we found the burial with suspected TB, would do a differential diagnosis, so look at all the different lesions. There's other places as well, things happening also in clavicle and stuff like that. So,
It's probably characteristic of the physical form of the bone.
yes. So looking at the different.
Not from the chemical things or something.
No, but you can also look for doing ancient DNA tuberculosis analysis. So that's a new well, it's not a new field, but it's emerging quite fast in terms of being able to do that. Yeah. So great question.
Looking at the prehistory catch and coming out, thank you.
Do I need to?
Go one more. Okay,
One more.
thank you very
Okay.
much.